Madam Deputy Speaker, I draw the House's attention to my interests, which are set out clearly in the register, and beg to move new clause 33, which is tabled by the Right Honourable Lady for Barking, who, alas, for the reasons set out by the opposition front bench, cannot be here today, but the House may rest assured that she will be watching every word of this debate from where she is. The House will notice also that not one but three former chairs and current chairs of the Public Accounts Committee have signed this amendment. The Honourable Lady for Hackney South and Shoreditch, my right honourable friend for Halton Price and Howden. And in addition to that, my honourable friend from Amber Valley, who is unavoidably locked down with his two adorable new children, and who has great expertise in this area, has also signed this amendment. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 33 makes a number of points. The first is that any company which is subject to the new digital services tax, which came into force this April, must publish transparently and publicly a country-by-country report. And although, as it stands, the amendment does not include a starting date, that has been rectified this morning, and the starting date would be April next year, April 2021. The new clause is targeted at international technology giants, that's Google, Facebook, Amazon, these huge businesses which are well known for using corporate structures deliberately designed to shield them from the payment of tax. And the new clause will allow Parliament, journalists, campaigners, civil society to see clearly whether these businesses are paying their fair share of taxation. And finally, the impact on the government of accepting this would make the UK, as the Honourable Lady suggested, a world leader in financial transparency, and it will give a major boost to country-by-country reporting for all corporations so that everyone can see that tax is paid on profits in the locations where those profits are earned. Now, I make clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the outset that it is not our intention to divide the House today on this particular new clause, subject to the Minister, who is a very clever fellow, showing due respect for advancing this agenda and for the importance of making progress on this in due course. And there are, in my submission, three reasons why this new clause really matters. The first is that its logic sits foursquare behind the priorities of the Conservative-led coalition. I thought the Honourable Lady could have paid perhaps a little bit more attention and support indeed for that. But the Conservative-led coalition, which wanted to inject greater transparency and openness into the financial system, first by championing open registers of beneficial ownership, which were introduced in the UK in 2016. This process has been enhanced over the last 2 years when the Right Honourable Lady for Barking and I persuaded the House that open registers should be embraced by the overseas territories and subsequently secured agreement that the Crown dependencies would also implement them. Such progress, Madam Deputy Speaker, is a huge advance in tackling money laundering and financial corruption, and it also bears down heavily on tax evasion as well. And it makes it more difficult too for bent politicians and corrupt business people to steal money from poor countries and their citizens. All of this approach is built on by this clause. Now, secondly, at this dreadful time in our country where our constituents are suffering financially so severely and where our government is rightly seeking to help every family as we combat the economic effects of this crisis, it is frankly obscene and very offensive that some major corporations who rely on UK customers and make huge profits in our country should not pay their fair share of tax. The public and the public finances cry out for fairness and equity, particularly at a time like this, where some companies have benefited from taxpayer-funded rescue packages organised by the government, whilst not contributing equitably to the public purse. Public expenditure is now at an all-time high. This borrowing will have to be paid for, and it is simply not right or fair that while most taxpayers will have to pay more tax, 85% of us pay taxation through PAYE, while some multinational companies deliberately create financial structures to avoid paying tax. I also point out to my right honourable and honourable friends and members that those same multinationals are undermining British business by undercutting them on price, something they can do because they do not pay tax at anything like the same rate. In Sutton Coldfield, we are struggling to make a success of our town centre and high street, to renew it and reinvigorate it, but Amazon undercuts bookshops in our high streets and stores like John Lewis in our shopping centres because they are able to avoid paying their fair share of tax. And thirdly, and this is of particular importance to developing countries, credible research shows that developing countries lose 3 times as much each year from tax avoidance as they gain from development aid. The OECD has been pressing for this international reform in tax rules for decades. Those countries with most to lose have been most resistant. So the OECD compromise was that information should be provided confidentially to the tax authorities. And while, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is progress of a sort, it does not really help developing countries for obvious reasons to do with cost and with complexity. Clearly, it would be better, as with open registers, for all the data simply to be placed in the public domain, so there is a level playing field and public accountability for the tax conduct of multinational enterprises worldwide. I give way the pleasure.
I'm very grateful for the right honourable gentleman giving way. He may remember that during the coalition we put measures through, agreed at the European level, for a directive for transparency on payments made by the extractive industries across the developing world because of concerns about corruption with respect to mining in particular. That created greater transparency. The same approach could be taken to the tax issues that he is raising now.
Yes, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which has been led by the former member of this House, Claire Short, for some time, did a huge amount of good, as of course have open registers, because open registers have continued that agenda of transparency. And as I said at the outset of my remarks, this was an agenda which was championed and driven forward internationally through the British G8. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
All of the points he's been making, but just on the tax strategy, does he accept that unless we can dig behind the accounts to see where companies, for example, inflate costs in those countries where they can get lower tax rates and deflate costs in those countries with higher tax rates, that a tax strategy itself is simply not going to ensure that we get behind how companies avoid paying tax in the countries where they actually earn the profits?
Well, there's an important principle that while commercial confidentiality should not be compromised, we should move to greater transparency to tackle the problems which lie behind what he is saying. And I agree with that. I think that there's common cause across the House that that is what we want to do. And clearly getting a multinational standard will be the right result. But these things have to be led. In summary, Madam Deputy Speaker, this new clause is part of the Noble campaign, which is supported across the House to shine a light on the profit-shifting, transfer pricing and tax haven abuse that is used to minimise tax liabilities. The House has already voted in favour of public country-by-country reporting through an amendment to the Finance Bill in 2016, which gave the Treasury the power to make this information public. My right honourable friend, the Financial Secretary, will no doubt today rely on the prayer of St Augustine, "O Lord, make me chaste, but not yet," and argue that the UK would not want to implement this reform unilaterally, and he has already acknowledged that a multinational agreement to do so, or to do country-by-country reporting, would be a very good achievement, something he said in a letter to the Right Honourable Lady for Barking on the 27th of February this year. But I put to him that that is too timid an approach, and as we contemplate Britain's role post-Brexit, as we set out what we mean by global Britain, let my right honourable friend on the front bench today stand tall, show leadership internationally, follow the proud, confident example of David Cameron and George Osborne in this area. Let global Britain lead by example to the huge benefit of our own domestic taxpayers and taxes, and for those in the poorest countries too, whose mineral wealth is so often developed without their citizens reaping the benefit which they should do and they deserve. This reform would be in the finest traditions of Britain's past international development leadership, and I commend this new clause to the House.